I nearly didn't come here tonight. This again is Misson Carr and another trapping session, but it's absolutely perfect conditions. The bit of breeze that there's been today has now dropped, and it's very humid. Some dark clouds, but they're not forecasting any rain. Look, just remaining overcast like this. So hopefully I may well have need of this, which is certainly a very useful aid to moth trapping here. It's rather like the Lepidopterus equivalent of a keep net for fishermen. And that any moths that you're not sure of, I use this just for the macro moths, the larger moths, and any that I need to take back and photograph, either to renew some of the photos that exists on the website, or whether I just don't know what the moth is, and rather than pour through the book here, I can put it in here for safekeeping and then sort it out and photograph it tomorrow morning. It's August the 4th, and it should produce a decent number of moths, I'm hoping anyway. We ended up on the last session here with, I think it was 96 species. I don't think we'll get anywhere near that today, because this is a funny year. It almost seems a month in advance now, to be honest, so we might well now be at that sort of changeover stage already from the summer moths to those of the early autumn. And I don't like saying that when we're in the first week of August, but we'll see what transpires. There's an occasional sort of southeasterly breeze blowing across the fields here, so just to get a little bit more sheltered, I've gone to that side of the gate. It's quite a sheltered little corner. The breeze isn't enough to stop the moths from coming in. They'll come in, it just depends how many of them are to come in. And we'll see what species variety we get. There's the odd moth started to fly now, which you'd expect at dusk. It's just a case of waiting for the first one to come to light. But I don't anticipate a sheet full of moths again. I think we've had that for this year now. Well, half an hour gone and it's 21:45, and a few moths are starting to come in now. There's promising numbers of flies, and I say promising numbers of flies because large numbers of flies are indicative of a good night of insect activity, as also are beetles as well and caddis flies. But if you get things like water boatmen coming to the trap, that's always a good sign of high activity and maybe some dispersal due to the humid conditions. So let's hope that comes true, but nothing exciting yet. Now I want to try and show you some moths that I haven't showed you before, and this one is actually new as far as I can determine to Misson, or at least it was on the last trapping session. This is Pyrilid, and it's Donaquala forficella. There's another species that's quite similar, I'm hoping to get that, but this is a wetland species, and presumably it's moved into Misson here as the reed beds have developed over the last few years. Nothing particularly exciting about it. This is as good a marked an individual as you could possibly get, and there's just the discal spots on each wing that are the prominent markings. But it's one to look out for, a typical moth that can turn up in suburban gardens. I've had this at home a few years ago and it was quite a surprise, and it's the only one I have had at home. But on those special nights that you occasionally get, maybe once or twice a year, when moth activity is very high, This is the kind of moth you can expect in late July and August. Now I was trying to get this to settle down, and it finally has done. It's at an unusual angle, but this is a real little beauty, and it's a sallow kitten, a common enough moth and a very much a smaller version of the puss moth. It's very similar to poplar kitten, but sallow kitten is by far the more widespread of the two. Double brooded, so even in the next few weeks or the next month or so, you can look for the larvae of these on goat sallow, and they're quite frequently found. But this is a moth that I don't think I've showed you before. So this is sallow kitten, beautiful little thing. Common, say this will turn up in your garden, usually within the first year that you start trapping. But it varies in numbers, and I've sometimes gone a year or so without catching one at home. But if you trap anywhere in woodland, in a wetland area, you'll certainly get this chap at some time. Well, we've got some rain that started, but before that rain comes down or decides what it's going to do, I'll show you this. This is a beautiful moth, and this is a small phoenix. It's an absolute cracker, this one is. Beautifully marked and as fresh as a daisy. I think this has only hatched out today or yesterday. Common enough moth, another moth that you'll get quite easily in your suburban garden or even your urban garden. It is common, certainly in Nottinghamshire and across much of the UK. So this is one to look out for. There are a number of moths that are similar, but this is one that you will certainly get, and it's an absolute belter of a moth. So this is small phoenix. Beautiful thing, isn't it? Well, it's starting to get busier now. We're just past 2300 hours, and we're getting to that stage where you need to keep an eye on the sheet all the time, because moths are starting to come in, more of them and more species. We're on to about 50 or so species, so we're doing well, and that's in just nearly a couple of hours. Second brood of some moths are starting. There's a green carpet on the sheet. Beautifully moth. I do love green carpets, although it's a very common moth and will occur in numbers if you trap in woodland. Some are particularly green, and they're absolute beauties. The commonest moths, strangely enough, one of the commonest moths on the sheet is peach blossom, and I think I only mentioned a couple of trapping sessions ago here that never gets many peach blossoms in a trapping session, or certainly in a year, the odd one. But so far, 5 so far. Otherwise, it's pretty much the usual fare for here, but I have to keep looking at the sheet because it's so easy for something just to drop in, climb up the sheet, and then be gone again. But usually, moths stay close to the light anyway, and I do like having the sheet partly draped over something. That works particularly well for me, I must admit. There's a decent range of micros. Acrobasis advenella, which is another one of them moths that has transitioned, so to speak, or well, he's been pushed into a transition by taxonomists. And another one is mother of pearl, which used to be Pleuroptera ruralis, but now it's something like Patonia ruralis. Acrobasis advenella used to be Trachycera advenella, if I remember correctly. I do hate taxonomists. I wish they'd leave things alone. And it's a nightmare, name changes, if you run a website, as I do. Sometimes it can mean that you've got lots of pages and links to alter. But at least the rain has stopped. It's not come to anything, which is good. It was only a few spots, and it came a couple of times, but you never know whether those few spots are going to develop into something. So I think it's fast approaching cup of tea time for me. once I've had another look on the sheet. Well, just having a breather from the sheet, just come out onto the farm track. I do like trapping here, I must admit. It's very private, you have to drive past and go through a barrier at the farm down the track, and then it's almost, well, it seems like about half a mile, but it's probably about a quarter of a mile. You drive down this track which continues on for a fair way by the looks of it. It's probably near getting on towards a mile long, but nice and quiet. And the moths are coming in nicely. Round about, or just over 60 species now, so that's quite pleasing. I'm been quite happy and think we might get around the 75 mark. That would be a decent showing, I think, based on the couple of years that we've had in terms of weather. And the sheet is fairly busy. It's busy enough, certainly keeping me active. There's plenty to check through, and I hope to get myself into gear and go and have another check. There's a common moth, and it might appear quite dull and rather uninteresting, but if you look closer, it's a very intricately marked species. And this is a knotgrass, and it's a very easy moth really to identify. And those two dots there are on each of the trailing edge of the forewings, and it's a very easy species to identify. You'll often find this or come across this as a caterpillar, and the caterpillar feeds on a wide range of shrubs and various plants, and it's quite a beautiful caterpillar as well, actually, and quite large and noticeable. And the moth, it is fairly similar to a number of moths, but not as many as people would probably expect. Moths, as you've seen hopefully from this channel, are not all dull grey or brown and uninteresting. They're beautifully and intricately marked, such as this. So this is knotgrass, very common. You'll get this easily enough and regularly enough if you trap at home. Well, it's a busier sheet than what I was expecting, to be quite honest. And now gone over 64 moths. Looking at the books now, it looks like I'm on 68 moths, or 68 species of moths. So that's very, very pleasing indeed, and there are more to come in. It's not one of those nights that has suddenly been lit up by the arrival of a real rarity, but there's some nice moths, and once again it's a strange old mixture. There's the start of some second broods, and there's some stragglers from first broods. One moth that has come in was a cream bordered green pea, and it's right at the very top of the sheet. You may well see it walk into frame at the top of the frame, but it is coming down gradually now, but not visible as yet. And now I thought they were long since done, and I can't remember getting them in the last couple of sessions, but it's surprising what is turning up. And one thing that I'm quite thankful about so far is that the large numbers, or in fact relatively huge numbers, of large yellow underwings that people have been having a couple of nights this week just gone haven't materialised. Well, here's a nice moth that's settled on the back of the clock and thermometer, and it's dark spinach. This is not a species that I've trapped. I can't remember trapping it at all, to be honest, but I may well have done. But there are relatively few records in Nottinghamshire. It seems to be commonest perhaps in the north, but those records further south are quite well scattered. It's very similar to spinach, but there are subtle variations in the markings, but nonetheless it's a very attractively marked moth. The background colour is a sandy sort of straw brown. Then you've got that broad varying sort of band that goes across the wings that is made up of various shades of light and darker browns. A very attractive moth indeed, and say one of 4 that is in at the moment. So that's dark spinach. One problem or drawback, you could say, although it's a nice problem to have, is if you do trap anywhere such as Misson Carr, where during the summer months you're going to get good numbers of moths, really good numbers of moths. It does spoil it for when you go to a lesser site, and especially it stops you or makes you less inclined to put the effort in and trap from home. There's been several times in the last few weeks when I thought I'll run the trap from home tonight, and then just can't be bothered because I've become accustomed to getting large numbers of moths, and I know that at home I'm going to struggle to get large numbers of moths. So trapping somewhere at a location, a prime location in any county, will spoil you from when you have to start trapping again at home. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to continue to trap here regularly. I'd like to give it several years because there's so much more at this site, and I'd like to see a greater emphasis from site managers placed on micro moths. Our micro moths don't really have a lot of the rarity status that our macro moths do. Efforts have been put into place to try and rectify that, and they are every bit as important as the larger moths, those larger moths that you see on the sheet, and they're just as beautiful. Might be smaller, some might be harder to identify rather than this big poplar hawk moth, but they're every bit as important. Rare micro moths are every bit as important as a rare macro moth, and so it would be nice to see a greater emphasis placed on the recording of micro moths. It's something that Dillis and I sort of badgered everybody about and tried to encourage over the years people to get into micro moths and get rid of this and forget this sort of notion that every micro moth needs an expert with a microscope and a scalpel looking at it. They don't. There's many micro moths that can be identified from good quality photographs or as they come in on the sheet, and they're brilliant things to get into. It opens up a whole new branch of moth trapping for anybody. There's some corking micro moths, just as there are some corking macros. And here's a beauty of a moth. It's not going to stop for long, I don't think, but this is a gold spot, and any moth for me that has metallic elements to its coloration and markings is an absolute beauty. Just love how scales of insects can be metallic. Common enough, often sometimes seen in the daytime, nectaring at willow herb and plants like that, but it really is an absolute stonker of a moth, this. So gold spot. There is Lemke's gold spot, but this isn't one such moth. It's an absolute beauty and closely related to common migrants like the silver Y. So that's gold spot, one that you'll trap at home. It is widespread, but widespread and common or not, it's a beautiful thing when this arrives in the trap. Well, the breeze that started to appear when I first got here was now gone. It's only the very lightest of breeze if we go out onto the main sort of track. But here, there's nothing. It's a beautifully still early August evening, or night as it is now. And there's a few of the autumn moths appearing. A couple of copper underwings, yellow underwings, Cetaceous Hebrew character, second broods of them seems to be on the go now, or just starting. And flame shoulder, that's another moth that you'll get in the latter months of the year. It's a shame that we're talking about the latter months of the year, but we're very quickly heading towards it. Such is the speed of which the year is going. And I think we will get that 75 species quite readily. It started off this evening where there was a lot of micros coming in, more micros than macros. Well, that's turned around now, as it often does as you travel. And we've got a barn owl coming over ahead again. You may well hear it screech. It did fly right over the trap earlier on, but it's obviously gone past now. Yeah, has called distantly. So, good range of moths, good numbers of moths on the sheet. I'm very pleased with what's coming in so far. Now I just have to show this absolutely magnificent beast. This, of course, is a poplar hawk moth, very common and often just swept or brushed aside as being just a poplar hawk moth. But when you look at such a magnificent moth as this, and this is another one of those species and moths that's coming tonight that is as fresh as a daisy, not a scale out of place, and all of a sudden, within the last 10 minutes, 3 of these monsters have dropped in. Grubby finger time, first one for a while. That's how large a moth we're talking about. Absolutely beautiful. What isn't there to love about these? Fabulous, quite variable in the intensity and general overall coloration. This one, being particularly fresh, has a slightly almost mauve tint to those grey areas, and beautifully bedecked and coloured in these pastel shades of greys and olive greens and browns. It's just an absolute stunning insect. It is a fabulous hobby, moth trapping. Whether you already do trap moths regularly, or are just thinking about it, or maybe have just started and just ventured into the hobby, you will get an awful lot from it. But as with everything, it's a case of the more you put in, the more you get out. But my advice to anybody just starting is don't expect rarities. You will get rarities, but don't expect them. Rarities will come in their own time, and you don't need to come out to somewhere like Misson Carr. You can get rarities county rarities and national rarities from the comfort of your own garden. So don't go looking for rarities, because you'll ultimately just be disappointed. Your main aim is to monitor the number of moths and what species of moths come in to the light. At first, you will start just on the macro moths, and then hopefully, once you've got your confidence, and if you're trapping in the garden, you might need to start taking interest in those micro moths to get yourself a decent count. It's such a shame, really, I still think so, that the vast majority of moths arriving at a trap are ignored by even experienced trappers who won't entertain the mere idea of a micro moth. That's what we really need to change here in the UK. I think you'll get so much more out of the hobby if you can get into micros. Just take that bit of time and spend a bit of time in the winter months just going through photo galleries on websites and through the books. It's the only way you'll learn. And if you ask for an ID on social media, remember it. But it is a very rewarding hobby, although it is incredibly antisocial. But as I say, you can get good moths from the comfort of your garden. You don't have to come and perhaps risk your own safety sometimes, although I'm probably stretching that a bit, to be honest. But it does take some doing, going out on your own to record somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But you soon become absorbed into moths if you're out trapping. I'm glad that I took it up all those years ago. Well, it's gone 1:35 and time to start and pack up. I'm just having one check of the sheet and then off goes the light and we set off back home. I've ended up with 94 species, plus there's a number of micros to go through yet, so in all possibility could get 100 species, and that is miles more than what I forecasted and thought. So I'm immensely pleased, because I've been lucky with the weather. They didn't forecast the rain, but tomorrow's a complete washout according to the forecast, and Sunday might be okay, Sunday night might have been okay, but they're forecasting about 4 degrees difference, forecasting to go down to 13 centigrade tonight, and it has actually gone down to 14 as I'm about to pack up. So very pleased with that, and very pleased with trapping here overall. It's been absolutely fantastic, and hopefully I can come back and continue trapping here. As far as I'm concerned, there's much work to be done. The job's not even half finished.